Space Cowboy Books presents Simultaneous Times, a science and speculative fiction podcast. Short stories to stir the imagination by contemporary authors.
When the Water Stops by Eugen, with music by Fog Machine, read by Jean-Paul Garnier. As the climate turned, it hurled at them bushfires and razed huts to the ground, dust storms that swept away families, drought, all the cattle and sheep gone, reduced to skin, then skeletons. At first, the villagers took turns on the bleed, sharing dreams and fears, understanding that as a people, they were the same. But a typical grown male has the blood volume of just 5 liters. A 40% loss is deadly. The threshold, 39%, has only 92% water in it. The rest is washed away in glucose, hormones, proteins, fats, vitamins, mineral salts, and carbon dioxide. What good is it? CO2 may induce dizziness, tiredness, restlessness, convulsions, or coma. So given all the minuses, how much water would be left from a bleed to go around a village? They sifted the question in their minds while volunteers, having bled for the clan, sucked on cactus leaves and sap, figs and desert ants for 4 to 8 weeks afterwards. But still, they were not strong enough to take another turn when it arrived. The loss was not replenished. So where they first volunteered, now they drew sticks. It was plain luck, or missed luck. A stick was a stick. A short one was short. If you drew it, your fate was sealed. Your only solace that this death would not be a lonely one, but rather a communion that met society's needs. But even the drawing of sticks stopped eventually. It was a sacrifice too big. So now it was a matter for those with money, or bigger sticks, to determine who to massacre. And that determined whose ashes would float in the air, figuratively speaking. What really happened took place in the vat. The woman in the vat. What she's doing this week is sitting in a bowl, right there in the heat shimmer. She's awash with memories of drowsing, unfolding, everything in slow motion. When she looks back on this time, what will she remember? She watches the smoke swirling like a benevolent hug, giant clouds bubbling out the words. Where are you now? Her soul is an object brightest in the sky. Today, she's a bleed. Tomorrow, a wish. The leader of the nation. 10 years ago, the big leader came out of his shelter, determined to occupy the steps of a shrine opened as a museum to the Pope. He stunned human rights leaders, a few high courts, and many mothers when he pushed out his lip and held up a Bible for 1 full minute as cameras snapped. Riot police fell with batons, rubber bullets, and gas masks on peaceful protesters brandishing slogans about the art of cherishing and love. What was a drop of blood when the economy outweighed civil unrest and stocks soared higher? Did you see the Dow, a gain of 267 points? And the advances in the NASDAQ composite? evolutionary theory was all about natural selection of the form that would leave the most copies of itself. Light years on, every archbishop in an alternate universe, outraged by the misuse of a facility of worship, would consider the historic violation of the principles of humanity and utter 3 spaced words: "I can't breathe." Protests were always ugly, thought the leader, and a new election was coming up. The rich woman in the metropolis. "When the water stops, the blood must flow," says the woman with a rainbow diamond shaped into a bangle around her wrist. The $1 billion brooch, a set with an aurora pendant, was a gift from a cousin of a great uncle whose name she tried to remember but couldn't. It was just too hard. She flourishes from the catastrophe of others, blooms on the unimportant, like the people in her cellar, beggars from the village. Theirs is a narrative she doesn't believe in, the kind of story reflected in old photos by art historians. Her fabric is the politics that gave rise to Hitler, Mussolini, and Idi Amin Dada. She can't help it if those people don't belong in a near-perfect picture. They are mistakes, awkward memories that float a different image every time she looks, never authentic. There are many books about humanity, but this is hard. "Turn off the sound of their groaning," she snaps to her servants. The moaning is a sound that's never black or white. It doesn't obey the rules of composition. If their cry is a question, it's a cry in the language of Babel. She doesn't understand its vowels, syllables, syntax, parables, or context. And it's impossible to try, because that's so hard. What's not hard to understand is vintage produce with a good nose. The ones from the village come at a good price, and their blood is pure, uncontaminated by the city's pollution. Village blood combines the right acidity with a sweet aroma of smoke, bacon and pepper, violets inside a copper finish. A vintage blood must flow for the survival of her species. She cradles with affection a labradoodle puppy to her breast. A village husband under pressure. The revolution came when he alluded to reason. It was a reason created from the reflection of 14 hungry mouths and 3 dry cassava biscuits to go around. It was a reason that made him ask the question, wife or children? She'd brought them into existence. They initiated a cycle of living that was a torment. Perhaps his was an excuse to be unkind, to give voice to everyday hatreds, resentments, regrets. They crept in like dwarf monkeys and grew into pests, stealing, raiding, and all that. He was not the sort of person to hold a grudge on matters that came along with a sad marriage, so it was right to say it was fear that decided his choice. When his wife's own revolution came, there was no question where her truth lay: husband or children. He made things happen, yeah. Sorry. They said what happened in a vat was quick. He did miss having someone to rant to, but there was enough money to feed hungry children now. The youngest, just 2. Afia, the firstborn child. Abimbola, the rich-born child, but always poor, Amara, the graceful one now pot-bellied and bald with kwashiaku. Chi, Ke, Ri, Po. The quadruplets with nylon hair and eyes filled with sand. He made things happen because, after the wife, 14 options still. Afia, 5th of 14 motherless ones. I am a broken egg on a blistered road, a dying bird on a razor wire fence. The jackal trots this way, that way, sizing up how to eat me. My nostalgia is here again. No school, no soup. Just an empty sky whistling as we bury our dead. I am a marked card. Red marks the spot. The arrow will whiz into the eye of a dried-up fountain. Are you my mother? There's a skeleton trapped in the black mamba's hissing. Gray feathers swirling the wrong way. The youngest child speaks. I'm in search of something I don't know. There's a hand and a gaze, a smile and a scent. It's a comfort. It's a warmth. I don't remember the face that comes and goes. The love that is a crack. It's complicated. It's unsafe. Blurred and full of crumble. Nostalgia, a great uncle with empty sacks, an odor of mothballs in his breath, his eyes a fortress against hope. You think of this moment over and over, wishing you and the rest of the world remembered different. Due Date by Jean-Paul L. Garnier, with music by TSG, read by the author. She waves her hand over my console, and the transaction is complete. Thank you. Your due date is in 3 weeks. If you need to renew, feel free to ping me anytime before the due date. Mysterious Island. Not a good sign. It's never a good sign when they check out books about the sea. It means they're lonely. And if they're lonely, they're sad. I do my best to prevent this by making suggestions, and of course, the books we stock. But in the end, I can't tell people what to check out. They have to have at least this freedom. But ocean stories? A bad sign. By now they know when I'm trying to talk them out of a selection. And if I do, word will spread, and within a month, they'll all be reading it anyway. And the sadness will spread crew-wide. It can be worse than that. If they start checking out books about space travel, I know there's real trouble. One might think that such books would be a comfort out here, reading about people in similar situations. But from experience, I know this to be an act of desperation. It usually means they have forgotten what it's like to be planet-bound. When they forget the gravity, there's no coming back. If they reach for the sci-fi, I have to call the doctor to intervene. But I've painted a depressing picture. Since I curated the selection before we took off, I know the stock really well, and can typically make suggestions that help to improve overall morale. There are definitely things I would do differently if I could do it all again, though. Like ocean and space books. I would have left those behind if I had known. Something about those great wide-open spaces always spells longing. And that's an emotion we can't have lingering around on a ship this size. I wonder if when people traveled the world on the actual seas, if their librarians faced the same troubles. I also try to steer them away from mysteries. One would think that these would be a great pastime while we hurtle through the nothingness with little to do. But I see it almost every time. They start to get suspicious. It's not enough to have the mystery stay on the pages. They begin to doubt their bunkmates, sometimes the entire crew. Makes my job difficult. Back home, they were such an easy sell for those needing to while away the time. Nonfiction, that was supposed to be the main thing. After all, we're supposed to be preparing for our new life. I stocked every book on farming, construction, and basically everything we'll need to survive. Not that the folks on this trip don't have tons of skills like that, but we're due to get rusty after all these years of inactivity. No matter how much I try and push these subjects, no one wants to hear it. The thought of the soil on their hands is almost as bad as thinking about the sea or space. The reminders of home drag my shipmates right out of the present and back to darker times. One would think that picturing a tree in your mind would be a peaceful affair, but it's just another reminder of what we're leaving behind and the uncertainty to which we travel. Do you have another copy of Mysterious Island? The question draws me out of my contemplative state, and so it's begun to spread. The infection of the mind, missing those oceans, all that water, and shrinking at the thought of where we're going and all of the things it might lack. It's checked out at the moment. How about something educational? They're gone before I can hand them a book. The nonfiction route almost never works. Still, I have to try. It's understandable that they don't want the reminders, but we had better be ready when we arrive, even though that's a decade away. That's a long time not to hone one's trade. Even longer not to be thinking about the work. For most of us, our arrival seems so far away, and it is. But if we start to slip now, there's no telling how bad things could get in the remaining time of the journey. At least for the moment, everyone is still doing their ship duties. But Mysterious Island? I may need to speak to the captain. What books would I have brought if I had known what I know now? It's hard to say. I'm comforted by the books themselves. Even just the smell of them calms me. That's why we decided to bring physical books. Something about having the real object makes us feel more connected to those who wrote them. Or that's what we thought. It still works for me, but I wonder if I'll fall victim to the same malaise that's infecting the crew. I've got to think of some new titles to recommend. Something to help them get out of this funk. Typically, when all else fails, I would divert to the classics. Now I know that won't work either. In the early days of the trip, I tried that, but the pacing was all wrong for everybody. Our trip is a slow one, so nobody wanted to read slow books about fanciful people that can move around at their leisure. No one was reading much in those days anyway. The boredom had yet to set in. Everyone was still excited about our new lives and our upcoming adventures. Nothing like years of routine to get the restlessness going. Eventually, everyone took to reading voraciously, but it didn't last. No one was interested in a book club. I guess the idea came off as stuffy, and no one was reading the same titles anyway. That was before the pattern started to emerge. No requests have come in, but I'm starting to wonder if we should have brought along some self-help books. Though they would probably be embarrassed about checking those out. Knowing what books the crew reads can be an intimate thing. Anyway, I didn't bring many. The looks the crew give me are a clear indicator that they too are disappointed with my selection. And they are not pleased when they sense my reluctance to check out their request. If only they knew that I'm trying to protect them from the dreaded malaise. How could I have known before being out here myself? I am afflicted with the same dangerous mindsets, but I can't let anyone see that I'm troubled. It would only make things worse and further interfere with the trust put in my position. If I could do it all over again, I would have brought magazines. Something light that makes people feel connected with the goings-on of the world, rather than the lonely places and dramas. Information that can be taken in bite-sized pieces without the commitment of time that goes along with a novel. Our job, at this point, is mainly to wait, so the crew feels the passage of time in a painfully slow fashion. If I had brought more cheap entertainment, perhaps they would have had something to discuss with one another that avoids the more brutal aspects of our position. I think it might have worked. I wish I had known. Maybe the idea of something disposable would have been more appealing to them, something we don't have to recycle over and over again. Or should I have brought audiobooks? These days, everyone that comes to the library seems to have an aversion to conversing with me. If I had stocked audiobooks, it would have brought along with it a whole cast of strangers' voices. I think it's the sound of my voice that makes them cringe, along with the fact that most of my job consists of fairly scripted dialogue. The audiobooks could have spoken to them, introduced a slew of foreign voices that no one has had the time to grow sick of. But now, I'm speculating, and it won't do the crew any good to think about what could have been, what I could have brought, or what I could have done better. It's too late for that. But it occurs to me that perhaps it's not the material that's the problem. It could be that the act of reading is solitary. Everyone feels alone, and I'm giving them one more reason to be alone. I think back to all those smiling faces of the children at the terrestrial library during story time, and realize that that's what we've been missing all the while. We need to read together, to go through the stories together. Perhaps it's not the stories of the sea, mysteries, or sci-fi, but the fact that we need to face our loneliness together. So, I'm not going to worry about what books people check out. Reading should always be a good thing. Instead, I'm going to put out a notice that tomorrow evening, the ship's library will be hosting our first adult storytime read-along. Doing something fun together should raise the spirits of the crew, and we can face our loneliness together for a change. In this episode of Simultaneous Times, you heard When the Water Stops by Eugen Bacon, with music by Fog Machine, and Due Date by Jean-Paul L. Garnier, with music by TSG. Theme music by Dane Lusko. Be sure to visit us at our bookstore in Joshua Tree, California, or visit us online at spacecowboybooks.com.